They laughed when she walked away in silence, unaware that one man in the crowd, a billionaire with everything to lose, had just seen something that would change both their lives forever. Quick question for you before we begin. Have you ever been underestimated because you stayed quiet? Drop a comment and let me know. Welcome back to Her Value Stories, where every story is a reminder that love, loss, and resilience visit us all, no matter where we come from or what we carry. We may never know when life will change or why certain hearts are tested, but every moment holds meaning worth telling. If you're new here, take a second to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. And to our returning hearts, thank you. Your presence is what gives these stories their voice. Stay with us until the very end. Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. Now, let us continue. Nia Thornton stood on the steps of the Franklin Row Gallery in downtown Washington, D.C., her hands clenched inside the sleeves of a coat she'd owned for years. Cameras flashed, phones were raised, voices overlapped, sharp, judgmental, amused. She could hear them even if she didn't look up. Who even let her in? She doesn't belong here. Security should have handled this already. The gala inside was everything she wasn't allowed to be: polished, exclusive, powerful. Crystal glasses clinked behind the glass doors. Laughter floated out, careless and expensive. Nia adjusted the strap of her worn leather bag and took a slow breath. The kind her late mother had taught her to take when the world felt too loud. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She simply turned and walked down the steps as the whispers followed her like stones. Across the street, inside a black town car idling at the curb, Julian Cross watched the scene unfold through tinted glass. Julian had built an empire in Washington: real estate, private equity, influence that moved quietly but decisively. Senators took his calls, foundations bore his name, yet something about the woman being humiliated outside that gallery made him lean forward in his seat. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't angry. She looked controlled. "Do you know who that is?" Julian asked his driver, eyes still fixed on her retreating figure. The driver glanced. "No, sir. Probably someone who wandered where she didn't belong." Julian didn't respond, because for the first time that night, surrounded by wealth and noise, he felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Not pity, not curiosity, recognition. Nia reached the sidewalk and paused for half a second, just long enough to steady herself before disappearing into the crowd of the city that had learned to overlook people like her. Neither of them knew it yet, but this was the moment their lives quietly crossed paths. And right here, let me ask you, if you were Nia, would you have spoken up or walked away like she did? Nia didn't stop walking until the noise faded behind her. The city swallowed her the way it always did: metro doors sliding shut, traffic humming, strangers brushing past without a second glance. She descended into the DuPont Circle station, the fluorescent lights too bright, the air too stale. Only when the train doors closed did her hands begin to shake. Not from fear, from restraint. Across from her, a woman scrolled her phone and frowned. Nia didn't need to look to know what she was seeing. Someone had already posted the video. They always did. The angle would be cruel. The caption worse. "Security escorts woman from elite DC gala." Another one who thought she belonged. Nia stared at her reflection in the dark train window. Her face was calm, but her eyes told the truth. Old hurt resurfacing, layered over something deeper. She had learned a long time ago that dignity wasn't loud, that survival sometimes meant silence. When she stepped off near Anacostia, the night air felt heavier, honest. She walked the few blocks to her apartment, unlocked the door, and leaned against it once she was inside. Still no tears, just a long exhale she'd been holding for years. She didn't know she had been watched. Julian Cross arrived home to his penthouse overlooking the Potomac with a restlessness he couldn't shake. The gala had blurred together. Donors, applause, hollow conversations. Yet the image of that woman walking away stayed sharp. He poured a drink, untouched. His phone buzzed. A group text from the gala committee. "Did you see the woman's security removed?" "Embarrassing." She tried to crash a donor-only event. Julian's jaw tightened. He opened the video someone had shared. There she was, standing still while voices circled her like vultures. No shouting, no pleading, just quiet endurance. The clip ended with her turning away, spine straight, as if humiliation were something she refused to carry. Julian replayed it, slower this time. Something about her unsettled him, not because she'd been out of place, but because she hadn't acted like someone who was. He zoomed in on the freeze frame, on her face. And for reasons he couldn't yet explain, Julian Cross, the man who trusted numbers, contracts, and facts, felt certain of one thing. That story wasn't complete. Be honest. Have you ever watched someone get humiliated and later realized you didn't know the whole truth? Drop a comment. This is where everything begins to change. Nia told herself it didn't matter. She repeated it the next morning while standing at the bus stop, coat pulled tight against the early chill. She repeated it again at work, shelving files in a nonprofit office that ran on donations and patience. People talked around her, not to her. Someone mentioned the gala in passing, how dramatic it had been, how awkward. Nia kept her head down. This wasn't new. Being dismissed never was. But something inside her resisted harder than usual. Not anger, not shame. A quiet pressure, like a truth pressing against glass, waiting. She'd been careful for years, careful about where she went, who she trusted, how visible she allowed herself to be. Washington, D.C. rewarded those who performed power and punished those who didn't. She had learned to survive by staying just outside the spotlight. Still, last night had cut deeper. At home, she opened the small wooden box she kept on the kitchen shelf. Inside were documents she never looked at for long. Papers that carried weight, history, answers. She closed the lid quickly, as if the truth itself might spill out if she lingered. "Not yet," she whispered to the empty room. Across the city, Julian Cross tried to bury the feeling with routine. Meetings, calls, a lunch he barely tasted. His assistant briefed him on a zoning deal near Capitol Hill, but Julian's attention drifted. He found himself asking questions he didn't usually ask, about people, not profits. That afternoon, he pulled up the gala guest list again. Her name wasn't there. That should have ended it. Instead, it bothered him. He searched internal emails, found nothing. No incident report, no justification, just silence, conveniently placed. Julian leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, a habit he had when something didn't add up. Power had taught him many things, but the most important was this. When people rushed to erase a moment, it was usually because that moment mattered. He closed the file without action. Not yet. Both of them moved through the city that day, pretending the night before had passed without consequence. But Washington has a way of forcing truths back into the open, through chance, proximity, and timing no one controls. And somewhere between denial and curiosity, two separate decisions were quietly forming. When something feels unfinished, do you walk away, or do you dig until the truth comes out? The rain came down hard that evening, the kind that turned Washington, D.C. streets into mirrors and made everyone impatient. Nia was already running late when the bus stalled near Foggy Bottom, the driver announcing a detour that groans answered in unison. She stepped off and hurried toward the nearest building with an overhang, an old historic property temporarily reopened for a city-hosted community forum. The banner flapped above the entrance, Urban, Equity, and Neighborhood Futures. She hesitated, then went inside. The lobby smelled of polished wood and wet coats. People clustered near a registration table, shaking umbrellas, murmuring about transit delays. Nia moved toward the back, intending to sit quietly, listen, leave unnoticed. She didn't see Julian Cross enter. Julian hadn't planned on attending either. His driver had suggested waiting out the rain, and when Julian noticed the banner, something nudged him forward. The event was small, local leaders, nonprofits, the kind of spaces he donated to but rarely stepped into. Then he saw her. She stood near the wall, flipping through a printed agenda, hair pulled back simply, expression composed. No cameras, no whispers, just her. Julian stopped walking. It took a second for recognition to settle, and when it did, it hit him harder than expected. This wasn't a clip on a phone. This was a person. Real, solid, unbroken. Nia felt it before she saw him. That subtle shift in air, the weight of being looked at, not judged, not measured, but noticed. She looked up. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. Julian broke the silence first, his voice low, careful. "We've met before. Sort of." Nia studied him, the tailored coat, the calm authority he wore like second skin. She recognized him too, everyone in D.C. did, but she didn't react the way most people would. "Yes," she said evenly. "We have." "I wanted to say—" He paused, unused to searching for words. "I'm sorry, for what happened." Nia's fingers tightened around the paper in her hand. "Apologies are easy when the crowd is gone." The words weren't cruel, just honest. Before Julian could respond, an organizer announced that due to weather, breakout groups would be smaller. Seats filled quickly. The only two left were side by side. Neither of them chose it. Circumstance did. They sat down together, the space between them charged with unsaid things, both aware that whatever this was, it wasn't coincidence. Have you ever been forced into a moment you tried to avoid, only to realize it mattered? The room grew quieter as the discussion broke into small circles. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Someone passed around notepads. A facilitator asked everyone to share why they cared about equity, about belonging. Julian listened, but his attention kept drifting back to the woman beside him. Nia spoke last. "When people talk about access," she said calmly, "they usually mean invitations, but real access is about history, about who built something and who gets erased from it later." A few heads turned. Julian's eyes stayed on her. She didn't look at him as she continued. "I grew up in Southeast D.C. My father cleaned federal buildings at night. My mother cataloged archives at a museum no one visited anymore. I learned early that some doors open only if you already belong." There was no bitterness in her voice, just fact. After the session ended, people filtered out slowly. The rain had eased. The city breathed again. Julian found himself walking beside her without planning to. "You didn't answer why you were at the gala," he said gently. Nia stopped near the window overlooking the street. For a long moment, she said nothing. "Because I was invited," she replied. Julian frowned slightly. "By who?" "My grandmother," she said, then corrected herself. "In a way." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded document, creased, well-handled, not dramatic, not ceremonial, just real. "This building," she said, tapping the paper, "and 3 others on the same block where the gallery sits, they were purchased in the 1960s by a trust. Quietly, before integration made it fashionable. My grandmother was one of the signatories." Julian's breath slowed. "She was black," Nia added, "and very intentional." She met his eyes now. "When she passed, the trust transferred. No press release, no gala announcement, just paperwork. I was there last night because I had every legal right to be." Julian felt something shift, deep, unsettling. He knew the building. He'd reviewed its tax filings years ago. The trust name surfaced in his memory like a ghost. "You're saying—" he began. "I'm saying," Nia said softly, "that humiliation is easier when people don't bother to check facts." Silence stretched between them, thick but not hostile. Julian finally spoke. "Why didn't you say anything?" Nia folded the document and put it away. "Because people who rush to humiliate usually reveal themselves without help." Outside, the city lights flickered on, and Julian Cross, the man who controlled narratives for a living, realized he had just been standing on the wrong side of one. If you carried a truth powerful enough to change everything, would you reveal it immediately or wait for the right moment? They didn't leave right away. Outside, the rain had thinned into a mist. the city lights blurring softly against wet pavement. Julian held the door open without thinking. Nia stepped through, and for the first time since the gallery there was no audience, no phones, no whispers, just two people walking slowly down a quiet DC street. "I owe you more than an apology," Julian said finally. Nia glanced at him. "You don't owe me anything." "That's not true," he replied. "I benefited from a system that assumed you didn't belong. Even my silence did that." She considered him for a moment. Most people never admit that part. They stopped at a small cafe still open despite the hour. Warm light spilled onto the sidewalk. Julian gestured. "Coffee?" Nia hesitated, then nodded. Inside, the air smelled like espresso and cinnamon. They sat near the window, steam curling between them. The tension softened, not gone, but different. Human. Julian removed his jacket, something he rarely did in public spaces. "I wasn't always this," he said, half smiling. "Power has a way of hardening you." Nia stirred her coffee. "So does being invisible." He looked at her then, not as a problem to solve, not as a story to control, but as someone who had survived things he'd never had to. "My grandmother used to say," Nia said quietly, "that the loudest people are usually afraid of being seen clearly." Julian chuckled softly. "She sounds like someone I would have underestimated." "She wouldn't have cared." They shared a small laugh, gentle, surprising. Something loosened. For a moment Nia felt safe enough to say, "Last night hurt." Not because of what they said, but because I almost believed they could erase me. Julian's voice was steady. "They couldn't. And they won't." Their eyes held, not romance yet. Something deeper, recognition layered with respect. Outside, a siren wailed and faded. Life went on. But inside that cafe, for the first time in a long while, Nia felt the weight of silence lift, not because she was exposed, but because she was understood. The article went live at 6:17 a.m. Nia saw it on her phone while brushing her teeth, the headline bold and careless. "Billionaire Julian Cross linked to gallery scandal as mysterious heiress emerges." Her stomach dropped. She clicked. There was her name, misspelled. Her grandmother reduced to a footnote. Her story twisted into a narrative she didn't recognize, and at the center of it all was Julian, quoted, framed, positioned as the man handling the situation, handling her. By the time she finished reading, her hands were shaking. Across the city, Julian stood in his office, staring at the same article, his jaw tight. His PR team hovered near the door, voices hushed but urgent. "We didn't leak anything," one of them said, "but optics matter. If this escalates—" Julian cut them off. "Get out." They hesitated, then left. He reached for his phone, straight to voicemail. Nia sat on the edge of her bed, phone face down beside her. The quiet felt hostile now. All those years of learning to protect herself screamed at once. This is how it always happens. Someone else gets to tell your story. Her door buzzed. She ignored it. Again. Then a knock, firm, controlled, unmistakably his. She opened the door just enough to look at him. "Did you know?" she asked. Julian shook his head. "No. I would never." "But it happened," she said, voice tight, "and suddenly I'm emerging. Suddenly my life is a subplot in your story." "That's not how I see it," he said. "That's how the world sees it," Nia snapped, "and you have the power to stop it. I don't." Silence cracked between them. Julian's voice softened. "I thought we were past that." Nia laughed once, bitter. "That's the difference between us. You get to think that." The words landed hard. Julian stepped back, something wounded in his expression. "I tried to do this right." "And I tried to trust you," she said. "That was my mistake." She closed the door. Julian stood there longer than he should have. Inside, Nia slid down against the wall, breath uneven, wondering why hope always hurt more than isolation. Be honest. When trust breaks, do you fight for clarity or retreat to protect yourself? The city didn't sleep, but Nia barely moved. Hours passed with her phone untouched on the table, the screen dark except for the time. Every instinct told her to disappear again, to retreat into the safety of being unremarkable. Silence had protected her before. It could do so again. But something had changed. Julian sat alone in his office long after his staff had gone home. The Potomac reflected lights he didn't see. For the first time in years, power felt useless. He could issue statements, bury stories, make calls, but none of that would fix what mattered. Trust wasn't a problem to manage. It was something to earn. He opened his laptop and typed, then deleted, typed again. Finally, he recorded a video, raw, unfiltered, no branding. "Last week," he said plainly, "a woman was humiliated in public. I stood by and watched. That woman is Nia Thornton. She didn't need me to validate her worth. She already had it. What she deserved was respect, and I failed to protect that." He paused. "The truth is, she belongs in every room she walks into. The rest of us need to catch up." He posted it himself. No advisors, no edits. When Nia finally picked up her phone, it was past midnight. Notifications flooded in, mentions, messages. Then one link, sent by a friend with a single line. He did this without telling anyone. She watched the video once, then again. It wasn't perfect. It didn't erase the pain. But it was honest, and honesty was rare. Nia stepped onto her balcony, the city stretching wide and indifferent below. She thought of her grandmother. Of all the moments she'd chosen restraint over reaction, she dialed his number. Julian answered on the first ring. "I'm not ready to forgive you," she said. "I know," he replied. "But I am ready to stop running," she continued. "If we move forward, it has to be on equal ground." Julian's voice was steady. "That's the only ground I want to stand on." Silence followed. Different this time. Not a wall, a bridge. The gallery reopened 3 weeks later. Same building, same steps, different energy. This time, there were no velvet ropes, no whispered judgments, no silent calculations about who belonged. The event was public, truly public. Students from Southeast DC stood beside donors. Artists stood beside lawmakers. No one checked names twice. Nia arrived without announcement. She paused at the entrance, just long enough to remember the night she'd been pushed out. The memory no longer burned. It simply existed, acknowledged, finished. Inside, Julian waited near the back of the room, not at the podium, not at the center. When he saw her, he didn't rush forward. He didn't perform relief. He simply smiled, soft, genuine. She walked toward him. "You came," he said. "I said I would," Nia replied. They stood side by side as the program began. A speaker talked about legacy, about cities forgetting who built them, about repair that didn't ask for applause. When Nia was invited to speak, she hesitated, just a breath, then stepped forward. "I was humiliated here once," she said calmly. The room stilled. "Not because I lacked worth, but because someone assumed I did." She looked out over the crowd. Belonging isn't granted by permission. It's inherited through truth. Applause followed, but she didn't linger in it. Later, outside, the city glowed the way it does only when something has been set right. Julian and Nia walked together, unhurried. "I don't want to be your protector," Julian said quietly. "I want to be your partner, if that's something you still want." Nia stopped and faced him. "I don't need saving," she said, then smiled. "But I do believe in choosing well." She reached for his hand. Washington, D.C. moved around them. Cars passing, people laughing, life continuing. Power still existed. So did noise. But neither defined them anymore. Nia had not won because she was rescued. She won because she never surrendered herself. And Julian didn't fall in love with her because of the truth he discovered, but because of the strength she carried long before anyone noticed. Final question for you. Do you believe real love begins when someone finally sees you, or when you refuse to disappear? Let me know in the comments.